Thank you so much. I always like to remind everybody where we are here in Zanzibar. As you can see on the Google Earth, we are in that little red dot east of Tanzania mainland, and there's this huge, vast Indian Ocean that is really influencing everything that we're doing on these islands. A lot of people are not aware, but I always try and point it out just because it really influences everything we do. So you've heard that I've been busy on these islands now for about 30 years, educating myself, engaging in different projects, and trying to now bring all of these together since a couple of years in a foundation that I co-founded, which is called Green Waves Foundation. So everything that we learned around the marine and also around the land that we live on, we now try to put together, because we've learned that it's too disconnected. People still think they can conserve the marine and they don't look up. We think we can conserve forests and we don't look at community and what their needs really are. So yeah, our vision is to build a regenerative local economy, and that involves a lot of things. Regenerative means that it gets more and more, that it gets better and better. And we do hope to establish food sovereignty and security, because this has been an issue with the green revolution being pushed. We hope to protect biodiversity, which actually we have a little bit of a different approach rather than conserving, because I always say conserving is like a conserve in a jam, but life evolves, life changes. And then we hope to mitigate the effects of climate change and therefore create resilient communities in Zanzibar. That's our vision. So we try and achieve this vision through sharing the knowledge that we've gained, and by applying the concepts of permaculture in both public and private circumstances, and through cooperating with government agencies, as well as private stakeholders, whether they're local, international, national, everyone really, humanity at this point, we have to understand we're all one. So just a little bit to the financial sustainability, because we're really a grassroots organization. So so far we've received very little donations. Later on, we hope that we will get some of the sustainability, the financial one, through student fees. What we're doing is, and I'll explain that further, the foundation is actually implementing a lot of things. So we are partners in a farm, and currently we are offering our services in training in the hospitality industry. This is one way of making the bridges affordable for all of us, because in the past years I've learned that if I just offer courses for free, nobody's interested, because most people cannot even afford a course that is for free, because at the same time they don't earn an income. What we've also learned is, unfortunately, sadly, on this island, the hospitality has been the most destructive industry. So now we're looking at what can we do to regenerate spaces that, just because of the not understanding of the ecosystem functions of a beach, of the buffer zone between this big ocean that you saw earlier and what is on the land, how we can achieve this. And this is by actually moving into the landscaping parts of the regeneration and working with gardeners, hoping to inspire them to bring the knowledge back home. So we're working with a lot of people. You can see our so-called target groups. Some of them we work more intensively with at the moment, some of them not so much, but it's really everyone that we can touch, we try to touch. So I guess the big question is, what is permaculture? And it's a big question, because it really means a permanent culture. The dominating culture at this point, as we all know, is driving us towards extinction. So it's not going to be permanent. And if we look at some of the indigenous cultures that were sustainable, we find a lot of solutions, or at least inspirations, because of course, you know, things have changed a lot. So really, it's a design system to create sustainable and even regenerative human settlements, while we preserve and actually even restore our natural ecosystems, because those are the ones that we depend on. So permaculture is very easily guided by 3 ethics and by 12 principles that really are based on the respect for nature and all life. They're founded in a new scientific understanding of systems, and they're really rooted in ancient and indigenous knowledge that did work for as long until other cultures moved in and kind of bashed it. So just a quick introduction to the principles. They're a little bit like proverbs in all of our cultures, and I've found that proverbs very often can be applied in many of our doings, because they leave room for interpretation. Of course, we don't want them to be interpreted in the wrong way, but they're not like a cooking recipe that you have to follow. They're really, they are part of wisdom, and this is what the principles also mean. So the first thing would be that we don't just jump in and change things, but first we observe. We observe our environment, ourselves, the communities we are in, and then, you know, eventually we interact. Very often we say in permaculture that we do thinking and planning 80% of the time, and then maybe maximum 20 we actually do something. One of the most important principles is actually catch and store energy. And my favorite example at this point is growing trees. You know, let's store this wonderful sun energy because we've got so much of it. At the same time, we need to obtain some sort of yield. Some people look at it at the monetary way. What we've done here on the land that we are stewarding is we are regrowing a natural forest on coral rag. So we can't sell anything that is there. I mean, we could do tours probably, but the yield in that respect is just the pleasure of seeing wildlife coming back, you know, the duikers and the bats and the snakes and the everything. So yield can be defined in very many ways, but there has to be some yield. What a lot of people find difficult, especially as we're all so dominated by growth and by making a profit, is actually to apply self-regulation when you see something and you want to dive in or want to exploit it. And also to accept feedback from others. You know, I mean, these principles, they're a lot of common sense. There's nothing new. It's just really good guidelines, the same as use and value renewable resources and services. We use a lot of the sun. We sometimes have problems because we're off grid, but at the same time, our footprint is much smaller, which actually makes you feel better. And services, yeah, it's us, you know, as long as we're healthy and happy or halfway happy, you know, we wake up in the morning and we can be of service once again. And so as long as we're alive, we can be pretty renewable. One of the main principles is to produce no waste. And a lot of people now think this is more like in terms of plastics and, you know, things that we can't really renew, but or reuse, but it's also to really see in any of the systems that we talk about that we don't have something that we cannot use again. So meaning that any output of one system can feed another one. Very often we get lost in little details. You know, we like to do things because we like them the way they are. But in permaculture, we try to see the big pattern, the big system, and then start from there to go into detail. And sometimes the details can be filled in by people who are not the permaculture designers. We just give the big pattern of how things potentially should be able to work together. What is really, really important, and this is something that I actually personally used to struggle with, is to integrate rather than segregate, and not in terms of maybe plants or biodiversity animals, but really with people. And so, you know, that comes back to the application of self-regulation, because of course we all like to work with people that we like better, rather than working with people that maybe are more difficult. But especially when it comes to conservation, we really have to address the people that we find more difficult, because if we do manage to integrate them into the system that we try to design together, rather than trying to shut them out, then I found then we've won. Very often, you know, we like to move fast, but the next principle really advises that we should do small steps, because they might have a really big impact. So it's really like, take your time, you know, not waste time, but yeah, just move carefully. As in agriculture and everything, using and valuing diversity really brings us forward. Again, you know, with the rewilding, with the regeneration, we see that systems are so much more resilient the more diversity in species there is. The 11th one is use edges and value the marginal. An edge would be like, you know, where two environments come together, maybe the beach, the environment of the ocean and the land, or maybe a wall between a garden and a house. And value the marginal is really something that, you know, we wouldn't see as being worth to consider, because it's so small. But if we consider it 100 times, then something that is very small becomes a very big thing. In Swahili, people say haba na haba hujaza kibaba, and that means, you know, even little by little, you can fill a whole big tin that people used to measure things in on the market. And then the last and sometimes most difficult is that we are supposed to creatively use and respond to change, because we don't like changes. We love changes to the better, but we don't really love changes that are, you know, that are giving us even more challenges. But if we're open to those and try and see that in those changes there might be opportunities, and adapt accordingly, then actually we're moving in the right direction. So on the left side, this is a photo that I wanted to share with you all, because that is 3 of my team and apprentices and 2 gardeners in the hotel that we are working with. And the 2 guys in the middle, they are part of my team. And I was so happy when I took the picture that actually they show that they work together in a friendly way, because normally when we take pictures, people are like standing next to one another. So it's beautiful, because what we are aiming to do in all of the places that we work with is we are establishing relationships, friendships with the people that we work. And we do make a point that they are really important to us, because, like I said, we as humanity really have to come together at this point, and making friends over work is actually a really good way. On the right-hand side is one of the interview days that we did on our training site. So it's a lot of people who joined, who were potentially interested. And again, there is really an invitation out to the community, come in and see what we do. And while we do this, we already integrate, it's a showcase of everything we do. So even if people maybe don't feel drawn to the training, or we find them not quite suitable to join our team of trainees, then at least they've learned something the whole day that they spent with us. So I mentioned that we, as permaculturists, we are based in 3 ethics, and those are culturally evolved mechanisms to regulate our self-interest. Self-interest is important, but self-interest colliding with community interest is detrimental, as we all know. So those ethics give us a little bit of a better understanding of good and bad outcomes. And we've learned that the greater the power, you know, that humans might have, the more critical it really becomes that we have an ethical framework for our long-term cultural and also biological survival. So we're trying to reconnect to the the wisdom of this. And for example, when I'm co-founder and kind of the head of the whole organization at this moment, but when we work together, I make it very clear that we don't work hierarchical, because everybody has to share, so much to share, and that really everybody has the same value in our organization, whether they might be paid or unpaid, whether they come training or just visiting. Everybody has their most important space. So here's a little graph that explains the 3 ethics: the care for the earth, and the care for the people, and the redistribution of surplus. So care for the earth on our island is a lot related around rewilding the fast disappearing biome of the coral rag forest, and I come to that a little later. But the care of the earth and the care of the ocean, part of the earth, obviously doesn't go without the care of the people. And I found in my trainings that really people, trainees or visitors, they start getting really interested in interacting in a more sustainable way once they have understood that it's really about them, that it's not about giving something away, but that it's a lot about gaining something. So some people put care of the earth as the main principles to start everything, and I would dare say that care of the people is the one that is really, really mostly important, or the most important for me, because without people, without having people on board and looking after their needs, and we know that at this time our culture really doesn't support our human needs so much. And once you address that, it's amazing how people open up, and it's amazing how much they are willing to share that before that maybe they didn't. And then the redistribution of surplus really means it's the economy of enough. How much do we really need? What are our needs, and what goes beyond once our needs are fulfilled? Let's use it to do more, to create better opportunities for more humans and non-humans around us. So we really observe, and then we praise what we find in any of the environments, except maybe in a quarry, and maybe even in the quarry, there's something to look at. So it's a good system of analyzing a place, of designing, of implementing and reviewing, and it's really ongoing. None of us is perfect. Conditions change, everything changes. So it's a constant process, but normally after some time, it kind of does its own job like an ecosystem. So this is an example of what we've done at our place, because it sounds like all of you, we all love to live in nature. And we found it really difficult to find a place that we could stay in nature, and meaning nature which is full of life. So we did it the other way around. We found ourselves a totally degraded land that nobody wanted to live on. The village had moved on, and this is why we could have stewardship over roughly 6 hectares of land here in Zanzibar, which is a big plot on a small island. And we said, great. What we've learned in Chumbe Island in the 90s and at Misali is if you leave coral to itself, it's going to regenerate. We don't really have to do so much. So the only thing we did after 1 year was taking out the invasive lantana. And from there on, everything just happened like in a fairy tale story. The birds came and the reptiles came. And every year we find more species, whether it's animals or birds or plants. It's really wonderful. So we kind of recreated our own national park around us. We're very lucky. There's quite a few very ancient baobab trees. So this is a great demonstration site of really building confidence is, yes, we need to conserve our wild spaces. And this is what permaculture is also all about. But also, it actually doesn't take so long to regenerate and rewild. It's very rewarding. So this is what it looks like when we start a design process. We assess Where does the wind come from? How much rain do we get? What does the sun do, and so forth? What's around us, whether it's noise, people, and so forth. So I don't want to go into detail too much, just to give you an idea. Here, because in permaculture, we look at when we observe what would naturally be here before we humans might have, changed the environment completely. If we left it alone, what would happen? So where we are on the east coast of Zanzibar is used to be what we call a dwarf dry forest, all the way from the very north of the island to the south of the island, which was cut and depleted and burned, partially for agriculture, partially for firewood, building boats, whatever. Also because of agriculture, even though this land is totally not suitable for agriculture, but marginal land is being more and more sought after. So on the left, you can see the zones which we identified how we would like to use our land. In permaculture, we start with a zone 0, which would be our home, ourselves, and 1 would be one that we interact very often, like maybe a kitchen garden or chickens. A 2 is something that you wouldn't go so very often. A 3 is something where you go occasionally, maybe a food forest or a project that you don't need to look for after all the time. And a 4, for example, would be a stretch of land that, we go occasionally. And the number 5 is the wild zone. And you can see on our design on our own land, the number 5 is the biggest one. And the rest is really just for us humans to have something to eat, have something to do, and so forth. So on the right-hand side, we're showing a little bit of how we work as a forest. So having said that, our biome is a forest. If we want to farm food, we don't do annuals. We look towards what does a forest provide. So here's a rough idea of the indigenous forest that we kept, and then in the lower and around the ridges we replanted because that was stripped. As you can see in the top left of the bigger picture, this is our neighbor's land. So where the trees are, this is where we started forest farming about 20 years ago. Before that, the land was totally degraded. There was, except for the baobabs, there was no trees. There was hardly any shrub. So this is even in a very, very dry area that we are in is possible. This is my colleague Said. This is on our training site. In respect to the earth, the care of the earth, not producing waste, taking all of this in account, we actually try and only use things that are already there. It's very tempting to buy shade nets and build neat structures. However, we really try to only use what we find. And because our training site is on a 5-hectare hotel development site, we use what was either cut from where construction happens, or maybe something that is no longer used for constructions, including the shade which we use just shrubs and bushes after the goats ate them. Yeah, so talking about the Zanzibar Dry Dwarf Forest, it's really a biodiversity hub, and this is the training site. And at the moment, we are trying to build relationships to people looking after the red colobus monkeys, so we can be part of this. This is what the site looked like 2006. So you can see there's a road. Nowadays, the road is widened on the left, which is the west side of the road, which is cleared now, is regrown indigenous forest, which is actually put under protection by the government. It's the Kiwengwa Pongwe Forest Reserve. And on the east, on the right-hand side with the cleared area, this is where now our training site is located. This is the access road to the training site from the main road. And this is a plan of how we intend to use the areas. You can see along the beach side, the hotel is already being developed. And there's a lot of forest regrown, which we are now turning into a hybrid food forest, meaning we leave most of the indigenous trees that are there that are regrowing from the formerly cut land, but we interplant with trees that we can eat from. You can see the training site is in the southwest corner. And in that little stretch connecting to the main road is where staff accommodation and supporting facilities for the beach accommodation is going to be. So having looked at how people move, we identified areas of where we can do monkey corridors, because the Kiwengwa forest has quite a population of the threatened red colobus monkey, which is endemic to Zanzibar. And so part of our permaculture designs, working with farms, businesses, and hotels, is actually to try and see how can we recreate at least some wild areas and possibly link those to areas that are still hosting wildlife, and thus extending the range, because as you know, everything gets fragmented very much. So here you can see where we are actually spotting the monkeys and how we attempt to bring them in by planting trees that will give them opportunity to move without problem, provide them food and fodder and so forth. So having talked about food forests, most of our no, everything actually on this island is used to be a forest. This used to be a very forested island. So in permaculture, we try and mimic what we find in nature and replace with trees that are more suitable for our human needs, providing we leave enough for everybody who's not non-human. What I really try to encourage people is never to clear any bushland, but really very intensively start cultivation where it's already depleted. So this is just a good idea of how in a forest we can really have a lot of layers, which means we have a lot of more surface, which means in a small piece of land we can have a lot of food that is perennial. And we are trying to teach people to move away from annual, which is like the disaster zone, the first responders to a catastrophe, and obviously perennial plants have deeper root systems, which make them more resilient to less rainfall, heat, and so forth. And plus, obviously, regenerating the soil, which is really important. These are just a few examples of trees that we can eat off here in Zanzibar. And this is my favorite. This is obviously an indigenous one all over Africa. And I'm trying to introduce as many as possible. Here on my veranda, I have probably about 15 baobab trees in pots. These are the ones that provide us with most of our lettuce requirements. So I'm growing them in pots. And when they outgrow the pots, then they find spaces in landscapes. In permaculture, or at least in my way of doing permaculture, I try to look really far ahead. And we all know that currently the global heating crisis is going to change a lot of the landscapes that we currently still live in quite pleasantly. So I'm encouraging a lot of planting of baobabs, not just because they're beautiful trees and they really provide a lot of food for us, whether it's fresh greens or dried greens that we can eat later on, whether it's the fruit, whether it's the oil from the seed, or whether it's the bark that we can learn again how to make shoes and hats and fibers for wearing. It's really also a tree that, as you know, withstands almost all climatic adversities. So I'm looking forward towards when maybe people will have to move a lot to find better spaces to live. And then I'm hoping that maybe the baobabs that we're planting in this decade, in the decades to come, will provide like fast food for people who are on the move. Apart from the cultivated trees, we are also in our nursery growing a lot of indigenous fruit, because we found in our regrowing coral forest that it's actually amazing how our needs are fulfilled in terms of fruits and berries when in the local chambers, which is the plantations, now we're almost running out of mangoes. The pineapple season is over. A lot of the plantations are kind of drying up because it's the end of the dry season and it's just started to rain. But what is really amazing is that the bush food comes when there are no more mangoes or no more pineapples. So that adds to the resilience of a landscape, obviously. Plus, we all know that wild foods are so much more nutritious than anything we have ever cultivated in our even wonderful food forests. Now, this is where it comes to the regeneration. Building on this island is just going crazy at the moment. I've never seen landscapes change so incredibly fast. I've never been to China. I've been told that people get totally traumatized because every week, everything changes. This is one of our members from the in the NGO, in the foundation, and members pay membership fees, and in return they receive training, landscape designs, really guiding their staff through the whole process of developing their own permaculture environment. So this is here in my now town, almost in the village in the northeast in Litimba in Zanzibar on the east coast. It's very dry. This is the backside of the sand dune from the beach. If I was to decide, nobody would be able to build on the beach, but it's not me to decide that. So we make the most of it. So again, here used to be a towering beach forest, but it's long been cleared for settlements and the obvious. So this is a site that is built for volunteers from overseas to come and learn, but also share in Zanzibar. And this was this year in July. And what we're doing on this site is we're really trying to bring back a lot of techniques also that link to the heritage. So Africa pit toilet system is actually a super cool system of digging a little bit of a hole, having a temporary toilet in there, later on planting a tree. Sadly, this is pretty much impossible, at least in our areas here. So there's this very cool thing, which is called an evapotranspiration toilet, which brings this into a modern context, the old heritage model into a more contemporary context. So on this volunteer side, people didn't want composting toilets, which are, I find, amazing systems of making really good human manure with using very, very little water. But okay, these volunteers come from overseas. Most of them come out of extremely developed areas. So for them, living in Zanzibar by itself is a challenge. So we try and make it as comfortable and adaptable as possible while they still have a lot of learning experience. So the evapotranspiration toilet really is a septic tank that is totally sealed. So none of the liquid, none of the black water can escape, but it is open to the top. So the black water is channeled into a tube, which we reconstruct from used car tires. And then there's a lot of moisture absorbing rocks and rubble around it with a layer of sand and then a thick layer of really good soil with a lot of compost. Now, the beauty is that through the hot sun and the plants that we used, such as bananas and taro, so big leaf trees and plants, the moisture and the nutrients are being absorbed. And at the end of this canal, we actually receive a little bit of biogas. So provided this toilet doesn't flood, it never needs emptying, and it provides the user with a really, really good bananas. So this is how we constructed it. On the side, you see a little bit of, it's very simple, very, very cheap technique. It's really important only that it's super sealed. And on the right hand, we're already filling with lots of organic material and then some soil. And And this is, you can see it's from top now. The toilet building is the one in the middle, the longish with the six doors you can see. So it's actually 6 toilets. So we combined 3 chambers on each side, and you can see how we already planted the bananas in there. Now this is September last year, and this is January this year. So applying permaculture techniques also for establishing gardens in here is again a food forest, also where there's none of the toilets. We plant a lot, and we put a lot of organic material. So here into this depleted sand, we put like box material, which, you know, like cardboard boxes from shops, and leaves that we found along the road. And obviously we introduced a little bit of really good compost to boost the soil life, and then allowed pioneer species to, like the castor that you can see here, which is something that grows in the bush here. Now it's naturalized, making the first shade, providing for a lot of mulch material when it's come back, when it's being cut back, and so forth. So it's thriving. So this was this Monday. So you can see the toilet building from the same top is not even visible anymore. The bananas are a little bit roughed up from the very strong winds we had, but you can see there's on that acacia on the right is a huge pumpkin already growing. So it's working. This is again from the side, in small spaces. How can we grow a lot of food? So again, the left is in August this year, and on the right hand was in February this year. You can see that on the building there's a tin roof. So the water of the tin roof actually goes into a gully, into a trench that we dug. So the rainwater is channeled to where you see all the vegetation. So now it sports bananas and sugarcane, taro, pumpkin, passion fruit, and the sorts. It's really thriving. Yay. This is a little bit another before and after what permaculture can do in urban spaces. On the top is another member. So on the very left is the property, one of the houses 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and this year. So you see step by step, we're introducing gardens, foods, and so forth. Now, what has this got to do with conservation? The more we concentrate on small urban areas, areas that are densely populated by us, the less we need to go into spaces that have not yet been settled or used by us. Again, at the bottom is how we layer in a depleted land some building materials, actually rubble from building, thatch from an old roof, planting, and then actually harvesting. So with seemingly nothing, we can do a lot over time. Having said that, in both of the gardens, bush babies came back because there's so much food now and so much space in terms of hiding, so habitat. So that's nice. Bush babies, the galago on this island are already also vulnerable, which is a pity. Yeah, so it's all about community. So on the left side, we are having a big group cutting and chopping to learn how to make hot compost. And actually on the right-hand side, this is 1 week later, and you can see how everybody's like in awe, discovering how soil organisms, especially bacteria and fungi, can really heat up a compost heap in no time. This is another method of composting, and compost for us is very important because we work with degenerated land. So compost is really not just the organic material that is slowly dissolving or rotting, but it's really, I call it, it's our chickens, it's our livestock, it is the microbes that we reintroduce to the areas that we are regenerating. And it's actually amazing how little compost one needs, provided there's enough organic material that the microbes can munch on. This is another technique that we really enforce in our trainings, is to I mentioned earlier in the principle to use the marginal. So from these tanks, there's tiny leaks, or when people wash or use the tap, there's always a little bit of runoff. So we're actually designing gardens around these runoffs, planting trees, or as you see in the left picture, sweet potato, to make the most of every drop of precious water and land. And here again is an urban space with a store to the left and a container to the right, with bits of grass and herbs that nobody wanted. So with the layering technique, by blocking out the sun, and again using waste, we are making a layered kitchen bed, and eventually planting and heavily mulching. And we ate tomato and gourds and everything, and the trainees were amazed what you can do. Yeah, we also do a lot of beauty. So this is actually a design for a baobab garden. Yeah, I mentioned that they're my favorite trees. I'm sure I'm not the only one. So this is the fruit, obviously. So the outer layer is like a hedge of edible chayas and cassavas, sheltering what comes inside. The purple is fragrant flowers and also herbs to protect what we actually plant in as a kitchen garden, vegetables and salads and so forth. Yeah, I think I'm through.
Thank you very much, Antje, for that very inspiring talk. I must say, as I said at the beginning, I knew very little about permaculture, but in many ways, I think a lot of the topics that you have raised are almost taking us back from our complicated and what we believe to be more sophisticated and lives back to almost a more simple way of things, and the incredible way that nature almost takes care of itself. So just wanted to say thank you very, very much for that inspiring talk. So we're going to just go now into the question and answer section of the talk. So if everyone can just go to the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's a reaction tool with a smiley face. And if you can press on that and then raise your hand, and then we'll watch out for questions. I can also go to questions in the chat if there's any specific ones that that people have asked questions, but we always like people to actually ask their question and to rather than reading it. But if you are nervous or shy, I'll happily read the questions for you. So please put up your hands in the meantime if you have any questions. Okay, cool. We'll go to Andy Klee. Andy, I'm going to unmute you. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Antje. That was amazing. I really, really enjoyed that. This is a bit of a different question, possibly. I'm going down a little rabbit hole of plant spirit medicine and stuff like that at the moment with my reading. A couple of your slides mentioned making room for spiritual places and space. Is there a spiritual element to this that you're working with as well?
Definitely, because without the spirituality, you don't get the people. It's really interesting because, for example, I don't know whether that really will answer your question, but I only found out not so long ago that my last name means the one who planted the small forest.
Wow.
So it's not the one who actually looks after it, but who plants, which, you know, for me was like a revelation, because I thought, oh, okay, now I know why I need to do what I'm doing. Yes, it depends obviously on, you know, how much space you have, but I guess if we don't connect to if we don't find the space to connect to everything around us, which is one, right? I mean, if you look at the energy movements and everything, of course, you know, spirituality is super important, if not the underlying basis for everything that we do. There's this awesome guy in Australia, one of the Aborigines elders who already passed on, who I kind of met, and he was out in the outback sometimes all by himself, and people would ask him, don't you feel lonely? And he said, how could I be lonely? I'm surrounded by brothers and sisters all throughout. So yeah, I don't know whether side is on, but we do speak about spirituality, and yeah, like I say, it's super important. And everybody's got their own, right?
Yeah, no, awesome. And I had one quick one. you're looking at the monkey routes and pathways. Have you thought, I've seen some stuff in, I think, Costa Rica, where they're looking at sort of high level crossing using ropes and stuff like that to get things across roads. You're probably on that, but I just thought I'd share that in case you hadn't.
Yeah, there was a trial in the national park, Juzani, which is the main base of, people looking at the red colobus monkeys. The monkeys never liked it. They never used it. So yeah, it's a serious question, because what we call the monkey highway is sadly also our government really wants to make this road even larger than it is at the moment. At the moment, there's not a lot of traffic. So I've never heard of monkeys being hit there, but it might well happen. So yeah, yeah, I'm trying to see, how tall a tree can we grow?
Yeah.
To bridge the road from one side to the other.
No, awesome. Thank you ever so much. Really, really enjoyed listening to all that. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And yeah, just if I can quickly ask on the monkey, I was also very interested in that, because often everyone wants the nature, which is potentially going to eat their fruit or eat the produce of their gardens, to keep away. How do you get that balance? Or you just see that as part of the whole system?
Well, in terms of the red colobus monkey, they don't eat fruit.
Okay.
However, they do normally come with Sykes monkeys who do eat fruit. So I don't know whether you remember the slide, because I didn't, I didn't do the whole design, but where we are wanting to allow the monkeys to be able to enter without being disturbed, is, I've seen, that if, it's the same with other people. I call monkeys people as well, is you provide them food and shelter and everything, they're not going to come elsewhere. They're very happy. And because in that area where our training site is, we've got the nursery, we've got mandala gardens, we have actually a lot of food growing, but we also have a lot of people. But they stay in that area. So the monkeys naturally do not really like us so much for whatever reason, as we like them so much. So there is it's like along the wall, the now wall, all the way to there. We're not going to interact. So it's really their area. So, but by interacting not so far away, they're not going to come the other way, and they're not night active. So, but, maybe we get an update, in a couple of years, and then, but even that, in the redistribution of surplus in permaculture, the fair share, this is definitely something that is part of all our trainings, is please do not think that 100% is yours. It's not. There's always, you will always have to share whether you like it or not. Do not expect 100% to be yours. And you don't know what's going to come emerging from that. Maybe, the seeds, yeah. But yeah.
No, thank you. It's a lovely concept. Thank you. I'm asking Koba to unmute, please.
There we go. Thank you very much, Antje. That was extremely interesting. I'm dialing in from the Kalahari. I'm part of a non-profit organization, Symphonia South Africa. We've been active for 12 years, and we're in 2,000 communities throughout South Africa and growing. And why I'm giving you these statistics, I want to ask you about the mistakes that you've made. I see that the first point you put in your essence of your work was observe and then interact. I see it so often that SED managers from large IPPs or mining companies in the area would go into a community, and they would start by doing what they think the community needs. And I know that there's this one, we work with school principals, and this one school principal had a business leader with an A personality type, and he went rushing in there, and he wanted to paint the classrooms and fix the toilets and the leaking taps. And she calmed him down, and she said to him, "Excuse me, ask me what I need." And he was very shameful, and he said to her, "What do you need?" And she said, "I need help, because no less than 14 of my grade 12 girls in the school are pregnant. So I need help with teenage pregnancy. I do not need help with the painting of classrooms. So yes, what mistakes have you made? What have you offered that was not needed because you did not observe? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
No, this is actually super good, because when we came to the place that we now live, where we regenerated the forest, obviously we don't do this by ourselves. We are part of 5 communities around us. You've seen that on the slide as well. So we used to be affiliated to the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of Forestry, and actually we got help in getting their land because there were no trees left. Everything was cut. So we were there to replenish the resources. So smart us thought, great, we're doing fuel saving stoves, which we did, in workshops, and it all worked really well. And from about 60 households, only 4 households adopted. So we had these meetings on and off. We were still not part of the community, coming and going, building relationships and all the rest. And it really, literally, you won't believe, it took us 3 years, 3 years, until one of the women actually took me aside and said, you know what? This is all really good, but we don't even have a shed to put this cooker under. Even if you pay for all the, the clay and all the rest, if it rains, we can't move it inside. So for us, it's not working. What we need is income. And I'm like, okay, got it. And this is how we started the data cooperatives network, to actually give the women in the village an income. So this is, so we thought we move in and we're really smart and they don't have to go for firewood, and forest will come back in no time everywhere. But this was not what they needed. They needed an income. And from the income, people upgraded. It's not that they get rich, by no means. It's only a help, but it was enough to be able to, to acquire the really needed. And then over time, because they could actually buy some things, the impact on the forest and the surroundings were not as much, and that did the regeneration by itself. So that was one of the biggest mistakes, because we did precisely that. We knew what needed to be done and it was wrong. So ever since, it's really about going and asking. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that reflection. And I think it's such a good caution to all of us who are do-gooders, who want to rescue, who want to help. Do not just tick the boxes by saying, I did 1, 2, 3. Be respectful, build relationships, and ask the people who live there what it is that they need. Thank you so much. I salute you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that bold question, and it was a great question. Thank you. I'm going to ask Neil Wilson to unmute, please. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good, excellent, great talk and excellent work you're doing. And I just wondered about the general reaction to your work on Zanzibar and possibly on the mainland. I know that in terms of permaculture and conservation, there's a lot of scope all over the world, various projects on the go, and communities seem to take to the way of living and way of doing things very, very keenly. What is your experience with the people of Zanzibar and possibly on the mainland, Kenya, Tanzania?
I've seen that people who have enough, they are a bit worried because it's all about redistribution of what you have, more than you need. Whereas I can see people who don't have enough, once you explain the concept, what is all behind, 3 minutes and they're on. They're really, really, really on, because they do see that it's an entire, it's a big opportunity. What I do still see is about sharing with non-human species. It's a big issue again, because if you don't have enough, you don't really want the monkey to eat your mangoes that you want to eat or maybe sell on the market. So this is, I think, where the talk also about the, the wildlife management in cultivating area comes in. But generally, is whoever has seen what you can do in a short amount of time, and this is why demonstration sites are so important. And this is why before and after are so important, and being really honest about the inputs, what is it that we put in? I see that a lot of people are very receptive, especially at the moment when it comes to the lack of proper nutrition. This island used to be pretty well fed, at least in some other areas, but now, as everywhere, it's the oil, it's the sugar, it's the starch. So people's health is rapidly going down. And there's a lot of realization about that. So people are actually quite keen on wanting to establish nutritious, food sources. What is interesting to see is how it does take a little bit of time to understand that we all depend on the soil food web, on the ecology of the soil. When that is really diverse, then everything on the surface that we see comes magically. But when people have gotten that, again, in a demonstration over time, then it's like, oh, it's so easy. So yeah, I think people are shifting, because there's more understanding that the Green Revolution hasn't brought us any benefits. On the contrary, people see how, their ancestral lands are devastated, how the topsoil goes, how, plants don't thrive, how they spend all of their income in inputs and they don't get anything. I'm also sometimes very drastic and see, this is the only reason why people allow you to live like you are, because you are a consumer of their products. So I also refer to independence. This is the food sovereignty, when you get out of that trap. So yeah, but generally, yes, it's changed. It's really changed. I'm still, maybe I don't appear like this tonight, but I'm still a little bit shy about it all, because like 20 years ago, people would not like me for trying to promote permaculture in the way it is. But I think there's a lot of realization, generally. So yeah,
Oh,
positive. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Then if I can just read a couple of the comments from the chat, and just to show how your talk has inspired even some of our young students. So Selu Maloleka from TUT, which is a university in Tshwane in Pretoria, he says, very insightful talk and a very warm one. The concept of permaculture was introduced to me by a friend in 2021 who's very hands-on, and I can 100% say that it is for our community benefit, just by seeing the work he does. I give thanks and to the speaker. So thank you, Antje, for that. There's quite a few other comments in the chat. Not many questions at this moment. I'm just going through. There is another one. Justin Bend, I didn't actually notice his question when I asked mine, but he had asked, do you have a problem with monkeys eating your crops? And if so, how do you protect them? So we did have that chat before I saw it in the chat. Sorry about that, Justin. Then Bridget Paul's got a question. I don't know, Bridget, if you want to unmute and talk, or if you want me to talk the question for you. If you want to just put up your hand, or I'll happily read it if you're feeling shy. Okay, I'm just trying to unmute Bridget. Otherwise, let me ask her a question. She's asking, saying thank you for a great talk. Do you use any livestock in your system, such as poultry, goats, etc.?
Yes, we do indeed. We've got goats. Hi, Said. Finally, I see you. Said, would you like to answer this question?
No, I would like to add something from Neil, who asked how the permaculture now is going on in Zanzibar and the mainland. Yeah, it's going now. It's going in a positive way, because even the government now started to, to recognize the importance of permaculture. But like I would like to use Tanzanian Republic the president. Now he created the committee that deal with the agriculture, just to change people to transform from using of chemical to the organic. So I'm referring the organic as the approach that to reach the permaculture. This almost deal with the inorganic farming. So this is a way, but in other ways, in my side, I'm coming from the mainland. It's another chance. I accepted the permaculture from Antje, and I have a vision that to increase this one out of Zanzibar. I mean to introduce a permaculture in the mainland. Is on the going project. I'm sure that we will reach it to the mainland, and we will see about 5 or 2 years to come. We will see in approximately. So, like a member from the mainland, of course, I'm very interested in permaculture, and normally I integrated permaculture as an ecological approach to integrate nature and the culture, something that we need to use the bark for over long ancestors as a way of farming and running their life. So I just wanted to add something about this, how we received or accepted permaculture system in Tanzania in general. So thanks to Antje, because she's doing a big job about increasing this knowledge and providing more trainings, offering different sponsors like myself. I got sponsors studying permaculture designing and the teaching from the Antje. So it is her stage, I mean, to spread out of Zanzibar, and we think that it will be widened in mainland. That is so what I wanted to add.
Thank you very much for that, Saeed. And just a quick comment before Antje answers the previous question, was the whole concept of not having a hierarchy and everybody is adding value and part of the solution and whatever was a really refreshing approach that you shared with us earlier. Antje, maybe if you can just answer the question about the utilization of other livestock in the systems.
I will. I just want to add something to,
Okay,
not
cool.
hierarchical, because, if it wasn't for that, I mean, we all have a lot to do, but this really takes the load off our shoulders. Once we build those relationships and we really tap into the, which is again, heritage, cultural heritage, into the common sense, things really start to change, and that's beautiful because we don't have to push. We are so coming from a culture where we think we have to push it and not allow it for emerging. And I find this is actually really amazing. Yeah, livestock. We've got goats. We've got beautiful milk goats. We've got beautiful milk goats because we have a forest. So in a forest, you always have a lot of brush. So what do you do with all the brush? You have your goats. So yeah, they're part of the system, definitely. We also have chickens because, again, our training site is on a 5-hectare hotel development who want to be one of the first regenerative tourism sites on this island. Not entirely regenerative because people will still have to come here. But, the whole thing is a concept of that the farm is there, the food forest is there. So yeah, there's poultry. We're also in chickens, and the local ones. We're not going for any of those broilers or layers or whatever. We're doing resilience. It's all about being resilient. So they're forest chickens. So they have their room, and obviously their outputs then are great for our compost systems. The compost is great for the nursery great for the food forest, and also we start supplying now to the members. And one of the comments we had the other day was, oh, it's the first time that plants survive in our place. What did you do? And I said, well, they're in plant bags with good soil and compost. So it's all about the soil ecology. So we do. And it's also, especially for our community, is really important to learn how to look after livestock well. Yeah. So yeah, they are part of the system, definitely.
No, that's great. Thank you for that answer. So there's a comment that Carol Preston has. She says, so many development projects tick funding boxes, but sorry, there's a bad noise in the background, but do not ask what the real needs are. And here we have the answer. It is so often the women that can answer these questions about what is really needed. So I think it links onto what Koba had mentioned earlier. I don't know if you've got any specific comment related to women in the community, Antje.
We, from our trainees, for example, we have about 1/3 women and 2/3 of men. I think also because of the way, you know, Zanzibar culture is, a lot of women are not really trusted to go away from their homes. They're supposed to stay in the community. So this is like next step for us. What I do see is in terms of nutrition, you know, that because traditionally here, the man of the house would bring the food home. And if the men don't bring it, where do you get it from? So especially something that costs a lot of money if you don't grow it yourself, like the greens. And I think this is one of the reasons why, especially in underprivileged households, all the money is spent on starch. So, you know, you fill your tummy, but you don't really get the nutrition out of the green leaves. So I see that there's interest in that for sure. And also medicinal, you know, so you can cook up your own teas to get better rather than having to go to the hospital. However, especially in my local community, I think because the resources here are so very limited, I dare say that in all of the different communities that I have engaged with, it really has to do with your natural resources, whether a community is open, interested, engaged. And the fewer the resources, the less open, engaged people have become. So in the area that we live in is what people say is the hardest on the island. So I think in my community here, most of the women, I think, are in such deep depression that they don't even care anymore. Really, I'm honest about that. Also because it's so dry, and as in so many other places, it's wild roaming livestock. So even if they do try and grow a little bit of vegetable, then the neighbor's goat comes and eat it. In other areas, I think it's different. And in more peri-urban areas, where there's a little bit more wealth, women are getting more and more interested to have their own greens again, you know, to be able to just harvest and chuck them in the pot.
We had some very interesting talks a couple of weeks back, where it was also the whole impact of women in the in conservation and whatever was discussed. So if you have some free time, please go and have a look at some of those YouTube videos. Darlene van der Merwe has just made a comment earlier saying, thank you. This has been very enlightening. As the population grows, more space will be required by people and less will be left for the natural environment, no matter how many systems we put in place. Do you see population growth as a problem?
I used to see population growth as the biggest problem. Since I've understood how the big corporations have kind of sucked up all the agricultural spaces, and how food has turned into a commodity, and how more than half of the food that is actually being grown is rotting and not distributed okay, I have come to the point that it is not about the overpopulation. However, I think it's probably time that we don't grow, you know, as we are growing at the moment. You know, and it's not so much because of the food. I think it's more because of the houses that need building. And I see this on this island, you know, it's really, in those 30 years, it's incredible how it's changed. It's just bizarre. And I imagine it's not just here. Obviously, it's coastal communities. But I don't know whether you all have heard of marine permaculture. there's very inspiring people in the US, especially on the East Coast in Maine, a former very extractive young man, fisherman, who like grew up in a family of fishermen, goes, depletes the ocean, you know, but has these realizations, seeing how they do it, comes up with concepts of applying, mimicking the natural systems, floating farms, and it's super successful. It's also very community based, so people really have to redistribute their surplus. And what they found out is by growing in farms away from you know, the normal harvest areas of fish, of clams, of you know, whatever is in demand, that not only relieve the pressure on the natural environment, but they produce so much food that statistically, if only they would have these farms, which is kelp, you know, which is clams, lobsters, you know, all of this, because they attract more and more, only along the east and the west coast of the United States, they could feed the entire world with all the nutrients that we need. But it's not land-based, it's marine-based. And I think this is really, it's interesting because our journey here in Zanzibar started, yes, on Sibylla's Island in the marine. And it was very much about conservation. And now after these 30 years, I can see also, because now I look at it from the land side, but onto the sea, that the marine really is our next big opportunity.
And
you know,
I mean, I've heard
for our planet.
Yeah, I've heard stories about these fish farms where they become almost toxic within themselves because of the concentration of waste and all these sorts of things. Is that a problem, or because in a way it becomes unnatural?
Well, the thing is that in permaculture we mimic the natural systems. So the natural system in that particular, also maybe around Cape Town, you know, is kelp forests, is how do species live, and this is what you would mimic by floating farms. So you would start with the kelp, with the seaweed, where then, you know, mussels would attach themselves, then the predators come, you know, or other algae-eating fish, seaweed-eating fish. So you recreate an ecosystem that is fed by the species that would normally, I mean, being inhabited by the species that, you know, would live there. So it's the opposite of a toxic system. It's the recreation of ecosystems.
Regeneration. Andy, I see you typed a question. Do you want me to save your vocal cords and read it for you? Okay, cool. So Andy asked you a question. Any thoughts on trying to introduce permaculture into schools? A school garden could help with nutrition and introduce the concept to the young generation.
Absolutely. And you know, we offered this to our local schools so often. I don't know how often, and it wasn't received. So we stopped. Now, last week, a local elder came to me and said, you know, yeah, our students are hungry. What do we do? Do we have an idea? And I said, yeah, I have an idea. Let's do some gardens. Gotcha. So it has to come from the communities. There's a project in Malawi, which is called Never Ending Food. They've been around for a while. They do amazing, amazing, amazing work. Never Ending Food. Permaculture.
Well, that might help you reach more women as well.
Yes.
At a younger age.
Yeah.
No, brilliant. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. I didn't even try and do a Pommy accent to try and mimic you. I don't know if there's any other questions that I've possibly missed. I know there were comments. Koba had also commented on Darlene's comment, which I did read out earlier. I don't know, Liesel, if you want to possibly make a comment. You had put something in the chat. I'm not understanding all of it, so maybe if you want to unmute. Are you still on, Liesel, for us? Let me ask you to unmute. If you want to, you can.
This was a very interesting talk. I'm also involved, well, I'm a fish parasitologist, but with the work we're doing in Botswana, I'm actually involved with NGO calling Pobelelo Trust. And they did quite a lot of this permaculture stuff, conservation agriculture. So I've made notes on the sidelines, so I will link you with the people in Botswana. And some of the stuff that you mentioned, it worked, did not work. I'm totally out of my depth when it comes to these conservation things. So it's interesting. So, and definitely on the women's side, also things that work, didn't work. And I must say, Cora was spot on with the women thing. And I think most of the time that we do a lot of these things is what we think is going to work, and then we misjudge what the local people want. And I actually just returned from Botswana, where we also had a workshop with the people there. So definitely much lessons to learn for all of us when we venture into trying to do all these permaculture and thinking with a Western head and not with an African head.
Yes.
Thanks for that, Liesel. I don't know, Antje or your colleague, if you want to respond to that.
Sadie, are you still here? No, he's having internet problems. We're all having internet problems.
No, that's fine. So I think we've dealt with most of the questions in the chat, and I think at this point, I just want to say thank you very much for your awesome, inspiring talk, and hopefully we can start to live these principles in our lives, in our own gardens, in our own companies, and introducing all of these things in everyday life. And thank you very much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you all so much for inviting me and for sharing what you have to say. Yeah, we're all together. This is what we say in Zanzibar, tupo pamoja.